It was late in the evening, and Jungkook sat on the couch with his laptop in his hands and constantly working. His eyes went to the door, and he knew who it would be someone with blazing anger. Fine. You're still here? Without waiting for an answer, Wine stepped into the room and put the tray of food forcefully on the table. Wine. And before you say anything, no, I'm not letting you skip a meal. You have been working too much lately. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, letting out a soft sigh, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I didn't say a word. She nodded, moving around the desk to sit at the edge of it. Fine. Good. Because you know I'm right. He admired the way she looked at him. Jungkook, what did you bring? Wine. Your favorite kimchi fried rice. And a little surprise for dessert. Jungkook's eyebrows raised. Surprise? Fine. You will see, but only if you finish the food first. Jungkook shook his head. You know I'm not used to people bossing around me, right? Wine tilted her head and smirked. Excuse me, I'm the boss here, and I command you to eat your food quietly now. Jungkook chuckled. He leaned down, his face close to hers, and whispered, Is that so? Wine's breath hitched for a moment, and she blushed. Yes. Jungkook's smile grew, and he closed the distance between them, his lips brushing against hers. Wine. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold. The surprise is worth it, I promise. Jungkook smirked, pulling her down into his lap instead. I'm more interested in my surprise right now. Wine laughed, shaking her head. Eat first. Jungkook. Eat what? You? He said while biting her cheek gently, making her laugh. Wine sighed as she looked at the fully decorated cake that she made after hours of effort. Wine. It's his birthday tomorrow, but I know for sure that he doesn't remember it. Wine. Idiot husband. She hit her forehead and packed the cake. Wine. I guess that's another reason to be happy, because I'll get to see his surprised face. She giggled and went out for his office. Jungkook sat behind his massive desk, staring at the shattered pieces of the glass he had just thrown against the wall. His chest heaved with fury, his dark eyes burning with a fire that could consume everything in its path. His company's security system had been hacked tonight. His eyes were already flaming, but then a call appeared on his phone. He slid it without looking at the number. Jungkook, what is it now? He heard a devil laugh from the other side, and then the man spoke. Your company is falling, Jungkook. Soon, everything you hold dear will be mine. Everything, including your precious wife. The tension on his forehead disappeared because it got clear who was on the phone. Jungkook. Kang Jaehyun, you. When did you come out of jail? Jaehyun laughed and said, You think you could stop me by the mere law? But don't worry, I won't kill you easily. I will snatch everything from you, and you know that I am capable of that. Just wait and watch. The call cut down. The words echoed in his mind. It was a taunt meant to cripple him, but instead it fueled his rage. Nobody, not even the devil himself, would touch Wine. His fingers clenched into tight fists. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't wait anymore. He decided to go home to Wine. He looked at one of the men that were standing in front of him and said, Deal with it yourself. I will come back soon. He sat in his car, but before he could start it, he received a text message. He looked at it, and it was from an unknown number. It was a picture of the cake, and the text on the cake said, "Happy birthday, Jungkook." Then another text appeared. "You didn't tell me it was your birthday. Well, I have a surprise for you." Jungkook looked at it and frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" he said to himself. Then a picture appeared on the chat. His eyes widened when he saw Vine lying down in the car, unconscious in the back seat. His heart thundered in his chest. He knew it was Vine's car because of all small stickers attached on the door. He sighed for a second because he remembered that he had put on a tracker in the car. He never did that before, but ever since an accident happened once before. He never saw where she went because of the tracker, except at times like this. "Jungkook, he's dead today," he said, and started driving his car after finding out her location. Jungkook never killed anyone in his life before, but he was so determined today. All he could think about were ways to kill Jaehyun today. Jungkook stepped out of the car and entered the warehouse in front of him, dark and silent except for a faint light flickering inside. He kept walking slowly until he got a glimpse of her, sitting far away, alone, with her knees hugging her chest. She was shivering in cold and fear. "Wine!" he shouted, but her eyes widened and she looked at her right in the dark from where Jaehyun appeared. He stood there with a smirk and then said, "You're so predictable, Jungkook. You think I wouldn't know about the tracker? I knew, but I also knew that you will still come alone." He scoffed. Jungkook's eyes were locked on Vine. "Jungkook," she whispered, making his heart tremble. "Jaehyun, come and attack him." He shouted for his men outside that were hiding behind shadows to come and get him. They all had guns too. After waiting for a minute, no one had come. Jaehyun shouted again, but Jungkook grinned. "Jungkook, stop shouting already. Can't you guess that they are already done for?" Jaehyun, "What? That's impossible. They all had guns, and even if you killed them, there would be a noise of gunshots." Jungkook, "They're unconscious, not dead. You said I was predictable. Then why do I feel that your legs are shivering?" Jaehyun scoffed and took the gun out of his waist belt. He shot at Jungkook, but he hid behind a pillar. Jaehyun kept shooting at him in fear because he didn't expect one man to do all of this, and eventually, he didn't realize he went out of bullets. He didn't know when Jungkook came in front of his face and punched him down on the floor. He lunged at Jaehyun, his fists flying, and Jaehyun barely had time to react before Jungkook's knuckles collided with his jaw again and again. The sound of bone cracking echoed through the warehouse as blood splattered across the floor. "You touched her?" Jungkook roared, his voice barely human. "You even thought of hurting her." But then he felt it, a soft, familiar touch on his arm. "Jungkook." Vine's voice cut through the storm raging in his head. He barely recognized her at first because he was too blinded by fury. "Jungkook," Vine repeated louder this time. She knelt beside him, her hand cupping his face gently, forcing him to look at her. "Stop." Jungkook's chest heaved with heavy breaths as his gaze shifted from Jaehyun's battered face to Vine's eyes. They were filled with worry, yes, but also with love. She wasn't scared of him. She wasn't pleading for Jaehyun's life. She was pleading for his. "Jungkook, I need to do this." His hands trembled with the need to finish what he had started. Wine shook her head. You're not a killer, Jungkook. His fists unclenched, the fury in his chest beginning to fade. His breathing slowed, but his heart was still pounding with the adrenaline. She leaned in closer, her lips hovering just above his. Wine, come back to me, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Wine, please. And then she kissed him. The fire in his chest, the rage that had consumed him, melted away with every second of her kiss. Her touch was all he needed to remind him of who he was, of what really mattered. Jungkook kissed her back, his hands falling from Jaehyun to pull her closer, his body relaxing for the first time since he had stormed into the warehouse. When they finally broke apart, her forehead rested against his. Vine smiled softly, brushing her thumb over his lips. Let's go home. Jungkook stood slowly, pulling Vine up with him, his eyes never leaving hers. He glanced down at Jaehyun, who was groaning on the floor, barely able to move. For a moment, the temptation to end it once and for all flared in his chest again, but Vine squeezed his hand. Vine, come on. Jungkook took a deep breath, and Vine wrapped her arms around his waist, leaning into him as they made their way to the car. Jungkook's arm wrapped over her shoulders protectively, and for the first time in hours, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had already called the police before entering the warehouse, so he didn't need to worry about Jaehyun. Now that he has escaped once, the police will either send him to US prison or somewhere else. Jungkook, I'm sorry for everything. I almost lost control. Jungkook whispered as they reached the car. Wine smiled up at him. You didn't. That's what matters. Jungkook leaned down, kissing her forehead softly. Jungkook, I don't know what I'd do without you. Wine, you're lucky that you will never have to find out, she replied, her voice light and teasing, despite everything that had just happened. Besides, we still have a birthday to celebrate, don't we? Jungkook blinked in surprise. He chuckled with relief. I forgot. I know. Wine grinned, leaning up to kiss him again. But that just means I get to surprise you. Jungkook smiled, a rare, genuine smile, as he kissed her back. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you too, she replied softly. Now let's go home.